The story I want to share with you may sound bizarre to some people, but it's important to me to speak my truth. Last winter, I took a trip to Latin America with my parents and my two pre-teenage sons. A mix of intergenerational bonding with my parents and scuba diving with my boys. On the last day of our vacation, I took a break from family time to join a curandero, what we call in the West a shaman, for a private healing ceremony under the open air of the forest canopy, using what's known indigenously as the grandmother medicine, ayahuasca. My previous experiences with this medicine had taken me on blissful journeys to connect to the fabric of universal love, blessings of gratitude, and divine light. But this time, it was different. I quickly became disoriented, disconnected, and alienated from self, as if dragged into the abyss by the dizzying forces of demonic energies. A spiral of negative spirits that would not let me off, the nauseating roller coaster ride of a fractured ego. Caught in a web of self-judgment and regret. A fatherly voice from alternate dimensions chastising me for selfishly betraying my family and well-being in the name of risky and extreme misadventures. I began to panic and could barely breathe. I was instructed by the shaman to sit up on my knees, focus my vision into the dark night, and chant the name of my grandfather, while the shaman attempted what he called an exorcism. I never knew much about my grandfather, David Flusberg, after whom I'm named. He passed away years before I was born from a mysterious illness. What I did know is that David was terrified of the water. Ever since, as a young boy in Eastern Europe, an ill-willed fortune teller had predicted his future death by drowning. That he had lived with extreme trauma and guilt, having managed by sheer luck to escape from World War II on a ship to America, while most of his family disappeared in Nazi death camps. And that he had, unintentionally and by no fault of his own, transmitted these energies of fear intergenerationally into my psychic DNA. Fears that mutated into a perception of unworthiness to my tribe. A guilty conscience that rejected my God-given right to outside-the-box experiences. Like scuba diving with my kids, spending time making art, drinking entheogenic jungle juice, and traveling to Amsterdam to speak publicly about all of it. As I chanted the mantra, David, son of Abraham, again and again, the last vestiges of my ego dissolving into fractalized chaos, and the shaman performing rituals in a circle around me, the skies opened and torrents of rain began to pour down on our heads. I collapsed backward, certain that I would die from drowning, while the shaman whispered in my ear, "Only you can save yourself." At that moment, I had a vision of myself guiding my 2 sons on a deep scuba dive to a sunken submarine, where we found my grandfather adorned with the prayer phylacteries he bequeathed to me, blowing bubbles in an underwater trance, a scuba tank on his back, and his free-flowing regulator out of his mouth. A tidal wave of psychedelic energy and superhuman confidence engulfed me as I signaled to my grandfather, "Is everything okay?" And he returned the okay sign back in my direction. He was me, I was he, my boys were both of us, and all was forgiven. I sat up, suddenly lucid, and the ceremony ended. I felt fine, reconnected with my sense of self, at peace with my surroundings, and smiling with the zen of expanded consciousness. For a few months, I did not know how to process this encounter, and I filed it away in my hyper-rational brain as just another adventure. Sometime later, I enrolled in an online study class about a famous story from Kabbalah mysticism, the Merkava, or chariot, from the biblical book of Ezekiel. Like my grandfather, the ancient prophet Ezekiel was a man torn by guilt and trauma. A priest in the temple of Jerusalem more than 2.5 millennia ago, he was exiled from his home to a foreign land, one of the few from his tribe to survive a violent assault by chariots of war at the hands of a technologically superior empire. One day, as Ezekiel gazed down into the rivers of Babylon, the waters reflected back at him an awesome vision of a new kind of chariot, a dreamtime submarine swimming multidimensionally in celestial waters, a psychedelic vehicle formed by mythological archetypes from the religious art of his oppressors, a tetramorph of human and animal faces, the wings of angels, and endless chariot wheels of electric energy lined with all-seeing eyes. You see, Ezekiel had reached down into the depths of his subconscious and transformed symbols of victimhood into a new story that projects visions of healing integration, a new perception of the chariot as a temple of the self, a self that embraces the tools and technologies to crack open the subconscious and invite the shadow to come out for a swim with the inner child. A self that chooses, with its own free will, not to allow fear of failure and loss to drown it, but to find its own way back to the surface where everything is okay. A self that practices non-attachment from land borders and social structures. A self that adapts to the chaos of ever-changing fortunes. A self that celebrates the unbridled freedom to move multidimensionally, and to just be. A self that accepts that we are and can be many things, and that is what makes us whole. A self that integrates the psychic energies of animal, human, technological, and angelic dimensions into the expanded consciousness of divine unity and light. Painting and writing poetry help me integrate my experiences with plant medicine. And the epiphanies it reveals to me about fire and water, darkness and light, contraction and expansion, transcendence and immanence. Infusing my art with references to diverse languages, mythologies, and religions helps me make meaning from the realization that I am one part in an integrated, universal chain. I'd like to share with you a free-flowing, myth-mixed poem I composed after my experience with the grandmother medicine, in which I meditated on my grandfather and on the Merkava of Ezekiel as a mantra for my journey down the trippy path toward expanded consciousness. Ay, 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 ay. Hello there, David. Again cast aground on the merry-go-round, under halos of light, in the darkness I lie. Merged in the modality of ego-purge duality, the ceremony begins with a dizzying dose of medicine-bent, almost apprehended mortality. On my knees, head between, tripped in two, ripped in blue by the crippling ripples of time. Flock to the white frock under Granddad David's watch. My unplumbed lines realign to unblock. My tale retold in untuned tones that radiate from the evergreen pine cone, hidden in the ever-heaving factory, in the gland beneath the crown bequeathed by dear old Dave's filial phylactery. And then wham bam, here I am, a ruddy silly putty in the glam down hands of a fearless, featherless, sharing shaman. A transcendent immanence, numinous illumination, bioluminescent illustration that draws me back to my spot on the mat in this fractal gasmic underwater planetarium. To unpack, to detach, to relax. And so I inhale. I expand through the smog that fogs the rained-on bows of my mirrored veil. To sneak to the peak of a flaming lotus that hums my hymns and wins the modus of my diamond-shined operatic operandi. The sandy pebbles pulverized into meandering granules nonplussed by sentient strands of silky stardust. I look up and then down, let go into the holy code of a thigh-high diving even flow, which babbles on and on, then breaks the dawn by the banks of the brooks in Babylon, into the fuzzy lines of thermoclines that filter warm broth from frigid brine, the freshly baptized rivers that fortify a grinning, spinning, eye-lined shrine. That place where I pray to the bellowing bubbles of submarines that glide over unwrinkled ridges of rigid space-time. A state toward shores unblighted by unbridled entitlement. The divine right to move multidimensionally through evangelical portholes of quasi-parallel quadrilateral porticos. Ego immolated by the agile activation of uncontainable, perpetually sustainable formation. A one-way rocket up to the station. The pearly gates of audacious, unpetrified, all-forgiving self-creation. And now I'm whole. Chariot I am. I drink this cup of freedom and say, goddamn, yes, to the prophetic prowess that soon will bless the Ezekiel-ness in me. Aho, amen. David, goodbye. Aye, aye.